Great.
Okay. And let me share my screen. Okay. Let's see.
Is that Monty Python?
Indeed.
That's awesome.
It is.
Okay, can you see my screen? I don't see the border around it.
I see. Welcome to Nashville Microsoft
Okay.
Users Group.
Okay, great. Terrific. Yeah, usually there's a red border around the screen, but they must be playing with Zoom because it's not there. Anyway, welcome everyone. I know we had a lot of folks that signed up for this meeting, and there may be a few issues with the meetup site. So if people didn't grab the URL in advance, they might take them a while to get in. Anyway, for those of you who are new to the meeting, welcome. We meet every month. We have a website which you can see, and you obviously know about that because you went into the to register for this meeting. There's also a YouTube channel, and we post all the meetings after the we post our recordings after the YouTube channel. Just to give you a quick look, we've actually built up quite a bit of collateral over the past year. And you can see there's a lot of material in our YouTube channel. Okay, interesting stuff that, take a look, you might find it interesting. Okay, what am I doing here? Get out of the way. Here we go. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, for those of you who are new here, this is a little bit about the group. I'm not going to read the whole slide, except to say that we're everything related to Microsoft Azure for education, all levels. We cover infrastructure topics. We cover developer topics. We have a forum for open discussion and informal networking among the membership. However, am I recording? Let me just double check to make sure I'm recording this.
You sure are.
Good, okay, sorry, I want to make sure. Like I said, it's a lot more fun when we can do one-on-one networking, and hopefully we'll get back to that pretty soon. We're meeting every third Thursday of the month at 6 o'clock up at Microsoft here in Nashville. We started out with food and networking, and that's the one-on-one networking that I mentioned. Then at about 6:30 we had we would start our main meeting topic. As you know, as you can tell, we're meeting online only. The thing that blows my mind is we have over 1,800 registered members here in Nashville. It's kind of amazing since we're not a huge city, so I'm really proud of that. We started back in 2013 with 4 members. So we've grown continually. We could always use more members. So tell everybody that might be interested in the group about us. And more importantly, if there are topics that you feel that you'd like to have covered by the group, or topics that you'd like to present to the group, get in touch with us and let us know. I always like to give preference to the people who actually show up at a meeting. So let us know what you think. This is our, excuse me, this is a little bit about our board of directors. I'm the founder and the president of the group. My day job is as an Azure Solutions Architect with Computer Task Group. I just started with them a couple of months ago. Roger Dahlman is a co-founder and vice president. He's an enterprise architect over at Deloitte here in Nashville. Tim Warner, you probably know his name. Tim is a very prolific Pluralsight author and book author. He's a member of the board of directors. He's also an Azure MVP. He presents frequently. I try not to monopolize his time, but he does present frequently. Michaela Allred is a board member, and she's our director of academic outreach. She tries to get work with the universities and colleges in the area to get students in the computer science programs to come to our meetings. Matthew Puckett is our permanent meeting space sponsor. He's a principal national cloud solution architect. He started as just as cloud solution architect back in 2013, and he's the one who acts as our sponsor here for the meeting space when we meet at Microsoft. We've been very lucky to have Vaco as a sponsor for our refreshments for the past 7 years. So Jack Hagler is on our board as well, and he's an associate director of recruiting over at Vaco. And about our sponsors, this is just a little bit more about our sponsors. Again, Microsoft provides meeting space for us when we meet on site. They also pay our dues and meetup. I spent, since 2013, I've been paying for the meetup dues out of my own pocket. But this past year, Microsoft started to sponsor Microsoft-focused user groups. So they pay our meetup dues. Vaco is our permanent refreshment sponsor. So they've been providing pizza for us since 2013. Excuse me. And they also, because they can no longer provide refreshments for us, they've switched to paying for our Zoom subscription that we're using. Okay. Well, excuse me. So that's it. Like I said, Computer Task Group is my new company, and I list them as a sponsor because I do take some time out of my work day to run the group. And also the Greater Nashville Technology Council has a subgroup called the Technology Group Leadership Council. It's made up of all the user group, excuse me, the user group leaders in Nashville, and I'm the chairman of that council. So in addition to being one of the leaders, I'm also the chairman. And again, I mentioned earlier about sponsoring a future meeting. If there's anything you'd like to do to sponsor the group, get in touch with Roger. That's roger@dolman.net. Okay. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to our speaker tonight, our speakers on Azure Landing Zone deployment at scale. And David, I believe you're going to be taking over and doing the presentation, correct?
Yep, thank you very much. I will go ahead and take that over now.
Perfect. Hi, everybody. My name is Donnie Pollard. I'm with SHI, and we are really excited to be here and to be able to talk about sticking the Azure Landing Zone at scale. We really want to kind of focus on ways that customers and clients and users and admins and architects, all the folks like that, how to really design and implement a customized foundation for your specific Azure deployment. So we're going to be kind of going over that here today. If we could move to that next slide there. Yeah, we're going to be talking a lot about, obviously, introducing ourselves. We're going to go into what exactly an enterprise at scale landing zone is, where to begin when you're kind of thinking about using one of those. We're also going to go in depth about subscriptions, management groups, managing policy at scales, network topologies, deploying your landing zone, and actually doing a deployment demo as well. And of course, you can't have one of these without some question and answer time. So we're going to be doing that as well. We'll start off
one thing to mention too is if anybody has any questions at any time, please feel free to unmute and speak up. As we're doing the sharing of the presentation, it's it's hard to keep track of chat. So please, let's make this as interactive as possible.
Excellent, great note, Dave. So a little bit about myself. Again, my name is Donald Pollard. I'm the manager of Azure Services over at SHI. So I got the great pleasure of hosting an incredible team here. Myself, I have 23 years in the industry, doing anything from massive AD migrations to Azure cloud deployments on a global reach and a global scale. So I have all this other stuff on the screen that I don't like to talk about, but my main thing is that I get to go into work every day with a fantastic team here at SHI and really help our customers increase their digital footprint into the cloud via migrations and landing zones and WVDs and all the stuff that's kind of come to the forefront, especially over the last year. So that's who I am, Nashville native here as well. So thank you guys for having me, and I'll turn that over to Keith to introduce himself.
Hey everyone, Keith Valentine. I'm an Azure Cloud Architect here at SHI. I've been in the industry 20 plus years. I'm an old infrastructure guy. I used to wire up buildings and wire 10,000 square foot buildings by running the wires through the rafters in the ceiling, and end-to-end setup from the ground up, servers, everything to do with IT. Had my own consulting company for 10 years. At previous employment, I was an IT director. I'm also a certified DBA, and I brought my propeller hat because my head is in the clouds. I love being in the clouds, and I will never go back.
Yeah, and then, so I'm Dave Walden, manager of data services at SHI, deal with anything and everything data. Everything from spreadsheets going into data warehouses all the way through to more advanced modernized architectures around AI and ML product. I've been in the industry since I was a teenager, started with data in about 1997. Then went on into doing a little bit of everything and got introduced to cloud in about 2006, where at one point I was actually Amazon's largest customer with over 1,000 cores running Hadoop workloads. Got introduced into Azure pretty early on, back in the Windows Red Dog days when it was just starting to be released to the public. I am also an international speaker. I do quite a bit of user group speaking. I do mainly topics on cloud, Linux, data, and container related topics. And I also help correct documentation for Microsoft, as well as write it on occasion. And I was recently in a book called Data Professionals at Work.
Perfect. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Keith. So to waste no time, we're going to get right into this. What is an enterprise at scale landing zone, and how does that apply to me in my business and or my customers there? And if we want to go to the next slide there, really an Azure at scale landing zone, it is that architectural foundation. It is everything that you'll build upon to really kind of grow your workloads, your resources, reach out to your internal folks or your external customers. It's everything that you'll need to build, making sure that you have the proper foundation, because you'll see a lot is that you'll kind of start off with the foundation for a one-room shack, and you're trying to put a 20-bedroom mansion on top of that same foundation, and it just doesn't work. And so Microsoft released, I think it was about a year ago, some good guidance for enterprise at scale landing zones and how to really institute those to make sure that no matter your business size, you can take that into account to grow your business as you and your workloads and your business evolve. So, that foundation is really made up of a few really kind of simple things that are really complex once you kind of get into it and get moving on that. So looking at scale, how fast, how big, how many people do I need to reach across, my plane of existence as far as, my applications or my websites. Also security, which is always going to be a huge thing to make sure our assets there are secure. And be able to enforce that security, across the globe or across our many different regions or resources that we have, establishing good governance to go ahead and make sure what we put in place is enforced and be able to be auditable. Also networking, how to go ahead and optimize networking, but still provide that segmentation to keep our compliance and our other business rules, adhering to those. And of course, as an old identity and access management person, I can't forget this one, identity as well. How we identify not only our internal users using Azure AD, but also our external users that may be consuming our services as well. So, this is a great methodology and a great architectural approach there to enable, whether you have workload migrations or this is a complete greenfield deployment into Azure. It'll help you to be able to either start small and scale out globally, or start globally and really optimize your model and your approach. And probably one of our biggest things that a lot of our customers, when we kind of start to discuss it, they're like, well, I'm already in Azure, I already have some workloads up there running, what do I do at that point? Landing zones, no matter where you're at with your current standing there, can be instituted, can be deployed, and workloads that in your current space, in your current architecture, can easily be moved over to this once they are ready to actually be moved and ran in this new enterprise at scale model there. So yep, no matter if you're brand new to Azure or you've been there for years.
Sorry, was there a question? Okay, no worries.
Perfect. So yeah, this slide here, this is the Microsoft Capitalign Enterprise at Scale visual. And I think the #1 PowerPoint rule is that if I can't read the text, that is going to be a really big visualization. So this is actually going to have a lot of the components and the parts, and it looks really complicated on actually how to get this up and running. So we're going to do our best here today, kind of break this down a little bit, kind of point out some key features, key things to look at, and be able to go ahead and enable you to understand that you can deploy this, with great confidence in this model, knowing that you can hit the marks that you need to hit for, whether it be compliance and governance and networking and all those things that we talked about, knowing that I'm good to go across the board, that as my business grows, it's going to grow into the model, and the model can go ahead and accept that growth without having to go back and do a lot of rework as your business grows to that tipping point. And with that one, I'm going to pause there. Is there any initial questions that I can answer about that piece right there? Perfect. I'll take silence as good. So with that said, I'm going to pass this over to Keith here, and we're going to start, where to actually begin in this journey to an enterprise at scale landing zone.
Thanks, Donnie. That's an intro to what the busyness of that document is. Well, you always have to have a starting point. And usually when you're starting with a company, you really have to determine what their posture is in the cloud. What are they doing in the cloud? And we break this down into 4 main groups that we kind of look at as the pillars, the foundational pillars that we would want to start with for getting people into the cloud. And the screen messed up for me. Does it mess up for everybody? It kind of pinched over to the side. There we go. Okay, sorry. Thank you. And so it would be based on subscriptions. We have management groups, policy and security, and network topology. These are kind of the 4 pillars that we would work off of as a base set of determining how do we want to start to structure somebody's landing zone topology, because every company is different. We just don't have one template that fits all sizes. Each company is going to have their own different flavor, so to speak. And so what we do is we work off of the Azure CAF landing zone topology and methodology. We go through these base set of questions and processes, and based off of these 4 pillars. So you can go on to the next slide for me. So first off, when we do this, we want to really define the strategy. So I'm over here talking about just this on the left side here. The big deal when somebody's going to the cloud is their motivations. What are they going to the cloud for? Do they have a data center exit that they got to get off at a mission critical time? Do they have a merger or acquisition? Or do they have end of life support for certain servers, like 2008 servers? They end of life there and they need to get it in the cloud so they can get extended support. Do they want to do it for cost savings? This is a dangerous one because not many people go to the cloud to save money, and you got to really nip that in the bud when they start talking that way, because it's very hard to get there. You don't really go to the cloud to save money unless you're trying to do it by using a lot of the PaaS offerings or getting to a feature set where you can maybe minimize your growth and only expand at certain times. And then innovation motivations. Sometimes people want to get to the cloud because they want to get more agile. They want to spin things up, turn them down. They want to have a better speed to market. These are all motivations that we would start asking, and then asking what kind of outcome. Like what are you trying to look to get out of the cloud? What's your business justification? Like who's the sponsor of this? So if I have a C-level sponsorship in a cloud migration, that's a lot easier than a developer that's saying, hey, I'm trying to make the company think that they want to go into the cloud. So these are all motivations that help us understand how to get to the next 3 sections here. When we start talking about, okay, once we understand their motivations, now we're talking about planning. What are we going to do to get you there? What is your organizational alignment? What kind of skill set do you have in-house? This is a big gap for most companies. They don't know anything about cloud. They don't have cloud certified technicians, architects, engineers. And so they're scared of it because they don't have people that can do it. All of these things help us understand where are you ready and where are you at on your cloud adoption plan. And then once we understand that plan, then we can start getting to the readiness part where we're going, okay, here's our readiness guide. Let's talk about your first landing zone and what we think you should build your landing zone on with what type of topology. And then after we get that landing zone built, that's when we would go to talk about migrations or innovations. Are we going to do lift and shift over your current infrastructure and just lift and move it to the cloud? Are we going to modernize it and then move it to the cloud? And so these are all conversations that when you follow the CAF framework, you're going through these decisions trees and these conversations where you really understand the motivation, then you can plan, make it ready, and adopt a cloud framework. Then the bigger deal is that once we get this stood up, once we actually get a cloud adoption framework in place and we get a landing zone in place, we can talk about governance and management. Because the other hard part about this for people is they don't know how to manage cloud once they get there. So when we bring this to the table, we start talking about, well, maybe you need to put policies in place. Maybe you need to put some bumper rails in place to keep things from being screwed up once it gets here. You make it you fix it as it comes in the door. So you fix it before it even gets turned up in production. You put the guardrails in place so you don't have this wild west of everybody doing their own thing. And that's about it for this slide. Any questions on this slide or this methodology?
I do have one thing that I'd like to add there to kind of add on to what you were saying. Keith, a very important piece of all of this as well is understanding any regulatory compliance controls or any governance requirements that you're held under, as that will dictate in a lot of ways what that in-state architecture will look like from a network perspective to a policy perspective, and what kind of separation or segmentation is required in order to meet even customer contractual obligations and other things. Really, that deep understanding of the business requirements in the beginning are extremely important, because you always have to begin with the end in mind. So you have to understand what those guiding principles and requirements are as we go through this, so that we get it as as close to right as possible the first time.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate that. And with that, I will hand it back over to you, Donnie.
Thank you, Keith. The very first thought that we really look at when we're looking at, putting this landing zone at scale for your enterprise there is going to be around your subscription. The subscription is that logical container that is inside your Azure tenant. And I don't know about you, like I used to think about it forever, like it's a billing container. That is the thing that I hook my credit card to, and I put my VMs and databases and all that stuff in, and it just goes to that credit card and gets paid. And, a lot of that kind of thinking is definitely still out there, but subscriptions and how they're used have definitely evolved over the last few years here. Most people, as far as very small, simplistic, I don't want to say just simplistic, but just small, just a workload or two, it makes a lot of sense to have, maybe a production subscription and a dev subscription, or non-prod, or however you want to label that one there, and then have different workloads inside that subscription that's going to be really segmented out only by resource groups. I'll have, maybe my domain controllers resource group, or I got a web app and my data backend are going to be on a different resource group. And, and all that really works well. And I had a great time using this methodology for years upon years. The problem is scale. When scale comes in there. So I know some of the first ones I ever deployed up, I was a workload, and I had to refactor and get the data on SQL paths, and you get it up there and everyone starts to love it, and you get the good reviews and everything's great. The problem is the next day they're like, that's awesome. Now let's move 500 of these up into the same cloud. It's the be careful what you wish for type of scenario. And the problem with that, it obviously comes into like, oh man, now I have, 5, 6, 800 different types of resource groups. I got to manually put permissions on all that stuff. And I got to deploy out everything manually and try to pull logs to those central spots. And it just becomes an issue of scale. It's the same steps as when it was smaller, just the administrative overload. It just becomes that overload of just tasks type of things to do. So Dave, you want to move over to the next slide here?
Certainly.
Thanks, sir. That's why we moved into this enterprise at scale subscription architecture. This client here, we kind of went through that CAF aligned framework with them, and we found out they're a very application-based client. They got some apps located in East US region. They got some in UK South. From our talking with them, they had that single subscription model, and they had hundreds of apps in there. Some were mission critical, some were protected data. Others were like, a small like ADFS server, things like that. And of course, we got a whole host of developers developing things, and it was all intermingled, and everything had a different NSG hooked up to it, different ways to actually go ahead and permission these things. And the cloud engineering staff, was just kind of going out of their minds how to manage that day to day. So we're kind of looking at this as an enterprise landing zone there at scale, is that we're able to take those things that are important to this customer, like their mission critical apps, their protected data, all those things that you're reading here on the slide, and move those into segmented subscription boundaries. And one of the great things that happen with these is not just that segmentation in name alone, that I know everything in this subscription is mission critical. I also have a network boundary and an access boundary between that and my other production apps or my non-production segment there. So I have that inherent out of the box safety measures in place as I go through and able to deploy out more and more applications. I have ways to segment these things so I can grow and just allow our staff and our application architects to be able to know where to put things, put guardrails in place for them, and let them go through it instead of always having to be the ones to evaluate each and every request that comes through the ticket system. So that's why we kind of look at this. And this one, you'll also notice, obviously we are in 2 different regions, different apps, but we're able to manage those across the board very similarly. Any questions on that part? Perfect. Well, I'll go ahead and throw that back over to Keith there to walk through the next section.
Management groups. Well, management groups are really very, very useful when you're getting to enterprise at scale landing zones. And I'm going to read the Microsoft definition for you. I'm going to simplify it. So Microsoft's definition, management groups are containers that help you manage access, policy, and compliance across multiple subscriptions. Create these containers to build an effective and efficient hierarchy that can be used with Azure policy and Azure role-based access controls. And while you fell asleep during that, I'll simplify it for you. You can think about this as Active Directory security groups. So you basically can apply something somewhere above your subscription level. This is underneath your Azure tenant. So you have your Active Directory, and then you have management groups, which kind of is an umbrella that is over all of your subscriptions. And if you can go to the next slide, I think this visual really does a good job of kind of talking about what are they different? How are they different than the other groups? So when we have other groups, we have role-based access control groups. You can use those with management groups. The difference is that you can put things in one place and they cascade downward. So I can have, let's say, an owner at the top level. And what this does is this helps me to prevent, let's say, shadow IT. I have people that are creating their own personal subscriptions, their own MSDN subscriptions. Basically, any subscription that is tied to your tenant, when you have management groups in place with the right permissions in place, you will know about it because it will show up underneath the management groups. The other thing that this does is it really helps us separate the roles and the responsibilities. We always like to talk about workload isolation, subscription isolation, because we might have a BI subscription. We only want the BI guys touching the BI subscription. So we can separate these roles and only give them permission where it matters. And we don't have to go into each subscription and do these permissions. So instead of having to do it 5 separate times for 5 separate subscriptions and then working about all the resource groups underneath each of them, we can do it once at the management group level, and it will propagate downwards. Next slide, please. Here's a great visual of it. So great example would say, let's say I have an owner and I want the owner or a reader. And I need these people, like your security group would be a reader of all your subscriptions. So I could set them as a reader at this top level, and it will propagate to every single subscription underneath it. And that way, I don't have to go into each one of these individual subscriptions and give them reader roles or access to the cost management or billing pane, those kind of things. But let's say I have this non-prod environment in non-prod, right? We have different permissions here. Well, I only want my developers to touch non-prod. So I can set their permission here at this level. That gives them permission for everything underneath it at whatever level of access I give them. I give them contributor or any of the umpteen million rules that are built into Azure where you can give individual explicit permissions to people. This is a great way for you to manage all of the subscriptions in one shot. So that administrative overhead that Donnie was talking about earlier, really you're minimizing this overhead to a very, very simple pane of glass. And it makes it very controllable for not only controls on access and what they can and can't do, but we'll talk a little bit later about policy and how these play into policy. Any questions on that previous slide before we go on? Anybody have any questions here? Okay, silence is golden. All yours, Donnie.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and kind of add to this. So we're going to talk a little bit about Azure policy and how to manage that Azure policy at scale when I have, go from, 1 or 2 to 1 or 2,000. So Dave, you just want to roll to the next slide. Perfect here. So managing policy at scales. It is not just adding more policies. You're not scaling up the number of policies here. We're going to scale up how we actually administer those and how we actually set those policies to affect the right resources, no matter how many of those resources there are, and across all of our different lines of business where that kind of makes sense. We want to be able to enforce some things with baseline and governance and regulatory controls and developer guardrails, things like that. We want to be able to have those bases, get them defined, and get them applied to the right things to enable our workforce. Instead of becoming IT the company of no, this is the company of guardrails, and go have fun in between these guardrails there. So we're also going to take a look here real quick is why you want to use policy with those management groups that you just set up to provide access. Before a group would go ahead and give you permissions, things like that in Active Directory. Azure policy is a lot like group policy was, where you can put a policy at a domain level, and it can go all the way down your OU structure to the actual individual resource, and you can actually target those resources way down in there. So as the cascading and the inheritance, we're going to kind of go through that here real quick. So Dave, if you don't mind flipping that one more time for me. Perfect. So what I did with this is take that exact same graphic and put that cool little policy thing on there, and I call my job done. That's what I did on this one. So what this is really showing is that same permission group is not just user-based, it's also resource-based as well. So that collection of Azure policies, we can define those and then place those at the right level of the management group to know that I'm going to target XYZ resources through my environment. At the very top there, we have that baseline. This would be like whatever your minimally viable product is for your environment, that no matter what you do in our environment, you have to have these things configured. Which would then go ahead and cascade down to the the security side of everything, where you want to have things maybe go to the geography, that, East US or UK South or wherever that is. So I got specific ones, security rules for that, because I have different compliance in the UK versus what I have in the US. So the cool thing about this is that resource that's tied to that geography management group level will receive the baseline, and it also receives the security. And it kind of goes down the tree from there. So I have my production, which would hit our mission critical, protected data, other production. I want to go ahead and create a HIPAA policy in compliance there, regulatory compliance. So I can define that there to make sure it hits all of those. But I may not need it on my dev side. At that point, I can also go down another level and do very specific data related Azure policies, Azure configuration things that, I want to have this stuff encrypted. I want to have everything go to this key vault, send your diagnostic data to this particular log analytics workspace or Sentinel, or any of those type of things that we can configure with Azure policy, which there's just about everything you could think to imagine to set. Azure policy has that somewhere, or gives you the capability of going ahead and allow you to do custom policies and custom roles there. So besides that, we're also looking at, being able to segment that off our dev section as well, where I want to make sure that the developer who needs to test out his 2-page, WordPress website doesn't accidentally choose an $8,000 a month, VM to run and test that on. So these are all the ways that we can set it at a very high level, make sure that every resource that we have is guaranteed to be enforced against that policy, and have those kind of cascade down to where I can really drill into the individual resource without having to place every one of these settings on every single resource manually. I think we got another slide there. So what we actually recommend for policy management. I'm a huge fan of Azure portal and/or blueprints to accomplish this. Set everything up, keep everything up to date, report off of that. It's great. It's a great tool, and they built it into the GUI for a reason. It's there to be used. They have a lot of other like some of your regulatory, like ISO 27001, CIS, all that kind of stuff. Already have those blueprints ready to go. So we do a lot of work in infrastructure as code. But those can be really complex to manage over time, because policy is usually going to change a little bit more than kind of the infrastructure state, things like that. So you're going to have little small things you change all the time. It's hard to keep that stuff up to date, keep the versioning right. It's a lot easier, we find, just to go ahead and make those changes in the portal, because we're using that cascading and hierarchical deployment model. And again, just real quick, applying those overarching policies at the highest level where you can, where it makes sense. And then you apply the policy to smaller and smaller subsets as you need to kind of zero in on a couple things. Besides that, again, what we talked about is using those built-in definitions and modifying to what you need. It definitely gives you that jump start, and Azure has a ton of those built in ready to help you out. Any questions on that?
Hey, Donnie,
So-
I had a quick question.
Sure.
When you guys are looking at policies, is it very much similar, just trying to relate this to on-prem infrastructure things? Is it a lot like AD group policy, where you're just kind of applying things from a structure down, and you kind of start with, I know that you said start at the top and kind of work your way with the most basic things and kind of get more granular as you go. I noticed that you didn't have policies on resource groups. Is that just not allowed?
No, I just didn't put those down there just because I forgot to copy and paste that icon in Visio and place it on there.
Okay.
You absolutely can go down all the way to the resource itself level. So
Okay.
we're just kind of showing like subscription management. That's a great point. But yeah, it works very similar to group policy as far as the way it inherits.
Okay.
And yeah, you can define just about anything you want.
Yeah,
Great, thanks.
and I actually have a couple of comments there. So common use cases that we see here, I think, doing this day in and day out for our customers, to kind of add on to what Donnie was saying with the, virtual machine types, right? A developer spinning up a WordPress site, they want the most powerful server that they could possibly get, so they spend up an $8,000 a month server. We see a couple of other things too. A lot of our customers really are constrained to where their data can live due to either contractual obligations or because of data sovereignty or other reasons. So some of the things that we see a lot of is customers that are saying, you know what, in my entire subscription, the only place I ever want resources to ever be allowed to spin up is on Central US and West US. Because we're big fans of following Microsoft recommended DR zones or region pairs for DR failover because of various reasons. So maybe the customer just wants to restrict access or resources to be spun up only to those regions. Some other things that we see as well is just little things like, I want to make sure that when somebody deploys a resource group, that resource group and all of the resources within it match, because you can have a resource group in a particular region, but that doesn't mean that all of the resources that you put into that resource group have to match. And one of the other things that's really interesting is one of the things that we see a lot of customers do with some of the custom policy that that Donnie was mentioning is take a look at the policy initiatives that exist today, in Azure that are very good, and then make some customizations to them. But the customizations that are being made more so are on how those, how that policy is applied. So in other words, a policy today may be a detect policy. So in other words, it may let you know if a particular condition is true or not, so that you can kind of follow where you are on compliance. But then we see customers want to turn that to a deny. So it doesn't matter how you spin up those resources. A developer can spin it up through a Jenkins pipeline. They could spin it up through, infrastructure as code, through some other method. Azure CLI, doesn't really matter. When you have those deny policies in place, it will prevent those particular things from being, for those resources for even being spun up. And that's one of the kind of the key reasons why our recommendation here really is apply the overarching policies to the highest level management groups. So things that will always be true, conditions that will always be true for your organization, apply them at the very top. And then because of the way the hierarchies work with the, with the management groups, it just automatically applies. It's kind of like that whole ROMP appeal, set it and forget it thing, right? I mean, you set it at the top, you forget it. You don't have to worry about it because those policies are automatically enforced for any resources that get spun up unless you specifically set excludes. And then what we see is that base set of policies that get applied to the highest level. And then we start to see more and more restrictive policies, as Donnie's kind of showing here with the HIPAA policies and others. We see more and more restrictive policies work their way down through the hierarchy as it makes sense. All right, any questions before we talk about network? All right, so network topology. So this one's always a fun one. So, what's interesting is, going back to, well, we have a visual a little bit later, but going back to the pillars of the, of kind of a landing zone. When you look at a lot of the either some of the pre-created deployments, some of the Microsoft maintained Terraform repositories and others, it really does focus mostly around subscription management groups, policies and governance, not as much around the network topology. So this is something that we really strongly focus on is that overall topology and getting that right and getting customers into the appropriate operating model that meets their requirements. So, some of the things we'll talk about today is, the flat versus hub and spoke models. I got a couple of visuals there, and we'll kind of talk through those. We'll talk about why you want to have a connectivity subscription that is kind of on its own. We'll briefly discuss peering. We'll talk a little bit about connectivity so VPNs, and then express routes, virtual hubs, and firewalls. So, earlier on in the presentation, it was, I believe, Donnie that was kind of talking about, a standard deployment. Here's a deployment where we're having just very much a singular focus, and that singular focus is the application of the week, the application that gets you started in Azure, or a particular business line of business application, or just maybe a new endeavor. So I like to kind of refer to that as myopy, right? So it's very much about, we need to get something deployed. We need to do it right away, and it needs to be done now. So we're just going to go ahead and deploy this. And then that becomes the basis for how all future Azure is done within an organization, without taking that step back and kind of thinking about, overall, and from an enterprise architecture perspective, what makes sense for greater overall adoption in general. And I like to say that's a lot of what we see with these kinds of flat network designs. So in this case here, what we have is a single application that's rolled out in a single VNet. That single VNet now contains multiple subnets. And then those subnets, if you notice here, we've got a web tier subnet, a business tier subnet, data tier subnet, management and Active Directory subnet. Those are all the same services that we would support in an enterprise at scale landing zone, but broken out into their own networks, into their own subscriptions with their own boundaries, and maintained and governed via their own set of policies through the management group hierarchy. So this is very commonly what we see a lot when we do architecture reviews for customers, or we're looking at customer environments for the first time, and they're looking at ways to expand because they've just really ran out of ability to scale within their existing environments, because it started out as a flat network, and they run into a lot of limitations on being able to expand this or to scale this out to anything more than what it is today. And sure, you could stand up another virtual network next to it, but then you've got all of the same problems again. You've got to get connectivity to it. You've got to be able to govern and maintain and manage it, and really it's just kind of duplicating a lot of the same issues. Now, if all you're ever going to do in the Azure environment is just a single application, and that's it, then this kind of solution would work for you. And honestly, maybe even instead of using virtual machines, maybe platform services without even the need for a virtual network would be a good solution. But what we find is that designs like this really run into scale issues pretty quickly once we start trying to integrate additional things within the Azure environment. So because of that, we typically recommend customers looking at a hub and spoke method or model. So in an enterprise at scale landing zone, these hub and spoke components. So the hub would be in a connectivity subscription, and then each one of those spokes may be in their own subscriptions, or may even be under their own subscriptions underneath different hierarchies within a management group. And the reason for that is because from a security and access controls perspective, you want to have one way into the environment. You want to have one place to protect, to reduce your overall surface area for attacks and just overall vulnerability. Plus, from an auditability perspective, you need to be able to have a very well controlled method in and out. So by limiting that down to a single environment, what you have is something that is a lot easier to maintain and a lot easier to manage and kind of wrap your arms around it, as well as collect logs, process those logs into a SIEM appliance, do network flow logs, and also even from a troubleshooting perspective, it makes things easier to be able to just have that single point. And then each one of these spokes, depending upon your particular needs, a spoke could be an application, a spoke could be a business unit, a spoke could be, a particular, service, for example, domain controllers, or even shared services, or any other type of service that that matters to your organization. And what you wind up with is smaller network subnets. For example, your virtual hub, instead of reserving a /20 /16 or something larger, because the typical network that we see customers deploy are /16s if they're not in a hub and spoke, which may be hard for some of these, or some of the organizations out there to be able to even reserve that much IP space, depending upon how fragmented their current IP space is through acquisitions and through other methods. What you have then is a /24 and maybe some /23s, or maybe some other network segmentations that are smaller and easier to maintain. And then they have a well-governed and a well-controlled access or data flow through the environment. So for example, in this case here, the Spoke 1 virtual network does not by default have access to Spoke 2. The only access that it has is just governed and controlled access between the spoke and the hub, and only with the type of access that you want it to have. For example, here we have an Azure firewall, and we also have a VPN. So that Azure firewall may have a connection to the outside, and through routing rules or route tables, we're saying only certain tuples, so only certain virtual machines, certain IP, certain port combinations are allowed to forward traffic through to the Azure firewall. Then the Azure firewall then, takes care of the internet side of it and runs it through the web application firewall, runs it through the advanced threat analytics and detection, and then provides you with a mostly safe access to the internet for your applications. So by keeping things segmented like this, not only does it give you an expanded scale, because you basically treat your virtual networks and your deployments as Legos, where you just, kind of lather, rinse, repeat those models for your applications. It also gives you that added benefit of just having much better security overall. Any questions about hub and spoke? Okay. Yeah, so hub and spoke models pretty much are our general standard recommendation for customers that are a little bit more advanced, and it is actually in line with Microsoft's best practices around VNet design within an Azure environment as well. So we typically will help modernize customers into a design like this when there is virtual infrastructure. Now, a couple of other, actually 4 more advanced network topologies that I wanted to talk about here. And I don't have mouse control for some reason, so I can't really point at anything here. But if we look at that upper box there, what that is showing is an example of Azure Virtual Lan. And Azure Virtual Lan is a little bit newer. Thanks, Keith. Yeah, it's a little bit newer. And it's Azure's overall SD-WAN solution. So in a traditional network model, when you're using a virtual network gateway to establish connectivity, not every customer, but some customers run into limitations pretty quickly around that. So, an example would be, let's say a large, organization that has many remote offices, maybe a franchise location that has many offices around the United States that don't necessarily want to go through the expense of having an interconnected network via MPLS or some other technology, or maybe they do and they want backup internet circuits should the MPLS go down, and each office location has a has an internet presence, and they want to have backups. So one of the big use cases we see, and there's plenty, but one of the ones that I think we see a lot with our customers is the need to establish multiple types of connectivity into one place that goes beyond some of the limitations for a particular virtual network gateway capability. For example, with a virtual network gateway, you get 30 site-to-site tunnels. With the virtual WAN, you get quite a bit more. It's well over 100. So it just gives you a lot more flexibility, and you still can follow a multi-region connected deployment this way by doing a hub-to-hub connection between two hubs. So in this case here, you have a route from a particular end-user workstation up through to one of the peered VNets in region 2, or over to one of the services in region 1, the VNet services, but not necessarily the services down on the on-premises. But it does give you a control, and it does help overcome a lot of the limitations that some of our larger customers do run into with traditional virtual network gateways and VNet design. So bottom corner there, that is a pretty traditional the other corner, sorry, Keith, the bottom left. Yep, thank you. So that shows the other, a pretty traditional model for customers that have multiple express routes that also have multiple hubs within different regions. So in this case here, there's 2 hubs. There's multiple spokes, and then these are in different regions. Now these could be even global regions because they're, virtual network peering does work across global connections through some limitations, but it does work across across global regions. But so think about it as Office 2 on the right, or region 2 has access with this kind of topology to services within region 1, but not services down into the office of what's directly connected to region 1 because of limits to transitive, network traversal. So that brings us to the one in the middle, which is Express Route Global Reach, which is actually it looks very simple because it's just like somebody took that picture and drew a green line. But it does provide quite a bit more, functionality for a lot of more advanced customers. Now, in this situation, a customer in London can actually now access resources over in San Francisco's office, not just what is in the Azure cloud, due to the connection between the 2 express route circuits. So because of that, it opens up quite a bit more flexibility, and that is all over the Azure backbone. So that opens up quite a bit more flexibility for, even disaster recovery type scenarios or DR scenarios, if we were to lose one particular express route or one particular region, to where now, without having to go through MPLS or through some other, interconnected service, resources within the Azure cloud, as well as resources within the on-premises locations, now have just quite a bit more flexibility. And then the one to the far bottom right there, that is basically 2 islands. They're Lego type deployments where they perfectly match each other, but they are treated as just completely separate siloed entities. We don't really run into this as much. We do see this on occasion. Usually the reason why we see something like this is for data sovereignty or some other kind of regulatory compliance reason. An example of this could be customers that are looking to do business within a custodial data center like Germany, or even a third-party operated Azure data center like 21 Vianet in China, where they want to go ahead and keep the same deployment so that all of their scripts are all of the same, but keep them pretty strictly disconnected as a way for everyone to, to be able to, basically keep things separate. So putting it together, we talked about subscriptions, we talked about management groups, we talked about policy and security at scale, and then we also covered network topology. So these are the 4 main pillars of a landing zone. So, lots of things to think about there, but this is typically the order we think about it. We think about it as how do we want to break down subscriptions? And usually that comes from the interview process where we're understanding the business units, we're getting an idea of how those breakdowns work. What are those billing boundaries? What are those chargeback, showback boundaries? How does all of that work? Then we look at the overall enterprise hierarchy, and a lot of times we mimic the enterprise hierarchy in management groups. Then we apply those policies to the management groups so that we have just that set it and forget it model. Then we design out the network topology to fit within how we've designed the subscriptions in the management groups. So any questions before we move on? I know we're running a little bit long here. We're at about 50 minutes, so I'll try to blow through some of the rest of this a little bit quick. All right, so deploying your landing zone. So things we want to think about before deploying. Things you really want to think about here are, what are the current methods that that your organization uses for deploying code? Because one of the key tenets of a landing zone really is infrastructure as code. You want to treat the infrastructure as code. You want to add on to it as you go, and you want to be able to make incremental change without having to to maintain a much larger set of infrastructure. You also want idempotence, so you want to be able to have that ability to run it multiple times, and if the net result is no change, it makes no change. It doesn't delete or deploy anything. Really it's, do you have everything in place? Do you need to create any service principals? What are you using to do the deployment? Are you using Jenkins? Are you using even something as simple as the Azure Cloud Shell, which is what we're going to show in just a few minutes here, which then goes into the deployment mechanisms. So we typically recommend for customers that don't already have a very well-governed CI/CD process or a source control process to use the Azure Cloud Shell for deployment. So the Azure Cloud Shell actually has the Terraform executable built in. So there's nothing additional you have to install. You just go ahead and set up a Cloud Shell. You set up the storage account. With the Cloud Shell, you can even use the automatic configuration, and you have everything you need at that point to go ahead and deploy a landing zone via Terraform. So separation of infrastructure and landing zone from application deployments, this is pretty critical. So you want to treat the infrastructure as its own set of deployments, and you don't want to commingle any application deployments with your infrastructure, landing zone, Terraform, or any other method. You want infrastructure to be infrastructure, and you want that to be a gold master that you can always refer back to in case you need to deploy that into other environments, lower environments, or what have you. And you want the application deployments really to be separate. You want them to be able to create their own resource groups, deploy only the elements that are necessary for the application to function without even necessarily having to know anything about the infrastructure outside of which virtual network you attach a network card to, if that is even a requirement. So what that does is allows application developers to be able to to deploy deploy their applications freely without potentially deleting or destroying anything that's already been deployed from the infrastructure. The other thing that's really kind of critical here, especially with Terraform, which is something that the Cloud Shell gives you, is remote state. Terraform is very powerful, but it's also very dangerous if for some reason you deploy. Let's say, for example, you've got two users, two workstations deploying Terraform with changes. When user one deploys Terraform, that state file by default is sitting on their local computer or wherever it is that they did the deployment from, and is not accessible from the other, the other instance of deployment. So Terraform will actually go out and say, hey, I don't recognize any of this stuff. and may delete what was deployed by the other user. There's some very interesting situations where I've seen this happen before. And my recommendation is if you choose Terraform as your deployment mechanism, that you invest in looking at using remote state in either in Azure Blob Storage, or you go with the the Cloud Shell model, where you're controlling where the state is, just to prevent any conflicts. All right, so let's go into a demo real quick. Let's see if this actually works. Give me a second here. All right, I got my mouse back. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and share out Visual Studio. Give me 1 second. All right, so what I have here is Visual Studio Code, which is actually my preferred development tool for Terraform. Now, one of the things I do want to throw out here real quick is, to me, absolutely, I am not following best practices on purpose for Terraform. So if any of you out there are Terraform experts and cringe, understand that it's for science. The reason why I do it this way is because I just want to make it a little bit simple when giving presentations, and not presentations on how to do well-formed Terraform, but these kinds of presentations where we're just introducing the concepts to where you can see what is actually necessary to build these resources without going through the complexity of modules. So just throwing that out there as a disclaimer. So in most cases, when we do an enterprise at scale landing zone, what we're actually doing is a multi-subscription deployment. So this is an example, real simple on how we could do a multi-subscription deployment. In this case here, you notice the subscriptions are duplicated. It's because, well, in my own personal tenant, I only have a couple of subscriptions. So what are you going to do? But, what we're deploying here essentially is a hub network. So we've got a hub network that we're going to be deploying in the central US. And a couple of things here where we're obviously commenting out some of the things that take a long time to deploy, like virtual network gateways. We don't really need them anyway in this example, but here we're deploying out these subnets, and we're giving it a tag. And then this is the CIDR of the hub. We're also deploying out an application virtual network. And this application virtual network is actually going to be in a different subscription. Then we're going to set up peering between the application virtual network and the hub. And we're not going to allow gateway transit because there's no gateway, but also this application doesn't really need to go anywhere. It just needs connectivity to the particular hub resource. We're setting up a couple of other virtual networks for shared services. And then, sorry, I'm trying to make this thing go away real quick. All right, let's just do that. And then here's a couple of interesting things. We're also deploying management groups, and we're deploying a handful of management groups here, and then we're assigning subscriptions to be under the management group. So you'll see that be deployed. And then I've got a couple of examples here of how you would assign permissions to a particular management group, owner, contributor, and reader. But in this case, we're not going to do that because we're just using owner privileges that we're already inheriting. And then, when Donnie mentioned earlier why we recommend managing policy through the portal, and one of the reasons why we recommend that is because of the complexities of managing policy and infrastructure as code in general. So there's some limitations with blueprints, where blueprints are subscription level. Blueprints don't necessarily apply to management groups. So if we do a multi-subscription deployment or even a management groups deployment, we just really can't support that in blueprints. So instead, we will do that either through portal, or we'll do that through Terraform. And as you can see, it gets pretty complex pretty quickly. So imagine, managing a thousand policies. As you can see, it gets pretty complex. And typically we like to go after policy initiatives when we can, or we'll create policy initiatives for customers. But what we're doing here is just referencing a lot of the built-in Azure policy definitions. Like in this case here, some of the common ones we see: the list of allowed locations for resource groups, and a few of the others. We're also applying, in this case here, Azure Security Center. And then I think on this one here, we're also doing apply CIS. Yeah, so we're applying the CIS 1.1.0 benchmark to the root management group. So then that gives us the ability, and here's the root management group here. So that gives us the ability to apply CIS once and have it automatically, be inherited by all of the children management groups and subscriptions due to the way the hierarchy is configured. So pretty straightforward, nothing super complex. So I was going to show kind of what that entire process looks like. So here I've got a, my Azure file share for my particular storage account. So I'm going to go ahead and upload these files. So pretty straightforward, just upload them. They upload pretty quickly. And then I have my Azure Cloud Shell here. And anybody that's familiar with Terraform probably knows what I'm going to do next, but I'm going to do it.
Seeing your Terraform still, Dave.
Are you not seeing the, oh, sorry.
No,
sorry, give me 1 second. Oh yeah, I don't even see that as an option here. Let's just go ahead and just do a desktop share. I'll be brave. All right, so anyway, so let's go through that process again real quick. It's pretty straightforward. We just go ahead and upload our files here, and then in this case here, we're just going to say overwrite. So we've gone ahead and overwritten our files. So inside of our storage account now, we have a number of Terraform files. So what we're going to do now is just in the Azure Cloud Shell, we're going to run through a couple of the basic Terraform commands. So I'm just going to do a Terraform init, because we've not run Terraform against this yet. And what Terraform init does is it looks at the way that we set it up. It downloads the appropriate resource providers, which in this case here is Azure RM version 2.5.6, because I typically like to use the latest versions. Now we'll do a Terraform plan. And Terraform plan looks at the Terraform and figures out what it's going to do based upon what it sees in the Terraform. So while we're running this, this Terraform would be a good time to also have a little bit of a Q&A if there is any, since it will take a couple of minutes to deploy. So in this case here, we're doing 39 things, and when we look through it, we're like, yep, okay, there's my hub virtual network in central US. There's my resource groups. There's my policy assignments. There's my management groups. All of this looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yep, this looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and do a Terraform apply. But this time I'm going to say auto approve, because I've already looked at it. It looks good to me. So there's no sense in waiting to say yes to give it permission to go ahead and deploy. All right, so just kind of open questions out in the room. Has anybody ever, does anybody have any stories about applying, policies to management groups, or maybe changing from a single VNet design to a hub and spoke design?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. Hub and spoke's a great architecture, especially when you want to separate production and non-production subscriptions, because you get big discounts with a non-production subscription.
Totally.
You don't pay license fees for anything. That's one comment I wanted to make. The other one is that I've noticed in some of the Microsoft larger landing zone templates that they have,
Uh-huh.
They split the connectivity and the management hub out. In other words,
Absolutely.
they'll have a separate management subscription for log analytics and stuff like that. So, and keeping the the real hub just for interconnectivity. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
And the other point I wanted to make is Terraform is terrific, especially if you're in a multi-cloud environment. I always think that Terraform was created because of the weaknesses in ARM templates that make it very difficult to build infrastructure. But take a look at Bicep, which is a domain-specific language for generating ARM templates. It's more of programming language. We actually had Tim Warner actually did a talk on Bicep a while back, and it is now GA. I'm not saying I'm not saying Terraform is going to go away, but I'm saying it's another interesting alternative to building infrastructure where there isn't actually a state file to get corrupted, like you mentioned before. ARM is the state, basically.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we actually we've looked at using Bicep, and it's very interesting because it's very similar to the to the Terraform declarative language, right? In a lot of ways. The one problem, and it's not really a problem, it's just kind of a difference in how you would do the deployments. The one issue that I've seen with it is that ultimately it's a front end for ARM, right? It what it creates is ARM, and it's still the ARM that you have to deploy. So it doesn't really complicate things a lot, but it does require a couple of additional steps in setting up a CI/CD pipeline for deployment, right?
Sure.
And it's and then it still has some of the inflexibilities that we see with ARM. Like we love it, and we're definitely keeping an eye on it. I would love to see it not have to go through that ARM process, and instead just kind of like Terraform does, where it uses a ZCLI essentially, right? So I'd love to see it get that direction, but yeah, it's very interesting, and we do like it a lot. And your other comment around the around kind of the separation of the management and the security and the connectivity. Yeah, absolutely. We're huge fans of that. In our more complex designs, we definitely do enforce that separation. A couple of things around that, though, that we run into from a limitations perspective is around security and auditing and controls, and like things like sending flow logs or collecting data and streaming data out via an event hub or something, right? When dealing with multi-region deployments, that becomes a little bit harder to do because of the a particular event hub is tied to a particular region, and you can't very easily set an overarching rule that says everything in these set the diagnostic settings to an event hub if you got the multi-region deployments, right? And then we like to a lot of times also have a management and then a security one, where we'll create like a separate log analytics workspace or a separate event hub just for security only messages, because a lot of our larger customers have their own security organization that doesn't really care about performance data. They just want to see logs. They just want to see things that are relevant to them, right?
Yep, good points.
Yeah, and I'll kind of add on to as well. Another scenario that we see a lot as far as subscription segmentation, is the shared services as well. So we add that in for parts of your app that may need to share one or two little things, but not have that conversation allowed throughout the whole rest of your network. So having that shared services where, let's say like you're in a hybrid scenario and you have like a on-prem Azure Active Directory, not Azure, excuse me, Microsoft Active Directory. So be able to put those up in there, share that off, or any other number of objects. But that's another one we see a lot of.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point, because the shared services, I think, replaced what a lot of organizations used to do with the connectivity subscriptions. I think maybe to Bill, your earlier point, it's kind of like in the past, when we first started seeing a wider adoption of hub and spoke methodology, what we saw was customers were putting domain controllers in the hub. They were putting, shared services in the hub. And, while it might seem like a good idea, we prefer to go that extra step and to separate them off into separate, separate subscriptions or separate boundaries, from an attack vector perspective, and even just an ease of access to utilities perspective. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
All right, so what we have here is a successful deployment. Of course, praying to the internet gods whenever you do live demos, right? So we have a successful deployment here. So let's take a look at a couple of things. So we've got 2 subscriptions in the United Federation of Planets. So in here, this was an empty subscription before we did anything. And what we've got here is our resource groups. So we have our prod central US for the network and our shared services. So inside of our network here, we've got our hub. And then when we look at our hub, we've got our peerings to our other networks. And then let's take a look at management groups real quick. So from a management group interface, we have 2 subscriptions, and I'm not a fan of this new management group interface. Honestly, I miss the old one. But we have our UFP management group, our quote unquote root management group, because you can't really do anything with the tenant root group per se. So we just like to kind of build our own root hierarchy. So then we have shared services, and inside of shared services, we have 1 subscription. Then we have our app management group, and inside of there, we have apps 1 and 2, and we have a subscription inside of app management group 1. And then when we look at policy, and then we look at these, we can see that the scope on all of our policies that we have deployed are actually at the management group level. So when we look at the subscriptions, let's go ahead and look at this one. And then we look at any policies for that particular subscription. And then we look at the assignments. We'll see that. We'll see that from a subscription perspective, that they are inherited from the management group. See here, our scope is that particular subscription, and then we can change our scope all the way up to the top there, or we could just look at, let's look at ufp.cloud, which was our app one, and then it needs to refresh, but anyway, as far as the UFP cloud, we did create a resource group in here. And there it is here. And inside of here, there's the virtual network for our application. So we did have a successful multi-subscription enterprise at scale landing zone deployment with, again, with the multiple subscriptions. We're just kind of faking the fact that we had 4, but, we have 2. So, and then we have the management group hierarchy that got created. We have the policies that we were able to manage at scale with automatic inheritance by applying them at the root management group, and then let the hierarchies go down. And then we have our networks and our network design and our hub and spoke topology for deployment. So this would represent a production ready enterprise at scale landing zone deployment. Right. Any questions? All right. Well, we did have one more slide here, and so no questions. So thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure having you all here and watching us drone on about things that interest us. So if anyone wants to get a hold of us, here's our email addresses, and then also feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or Twitter as well.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks a lot, guys. Excellent presentation. We'll be posting the recording probably in a day or two up on the YouTube channel. And if you want to send us, if you want to make the deck available to the members, just send us a copy of the deck and we'll get that posted somewhere too. Okay?
Yeah,
Yeah,
certainly.
happy to.
Okay. And with that, anything else? Anybody wants to add? Any discussion you want to have? It's fine. I'll stop recording so you won't be arrested. So let me stop the recording.